So far, we've covered the de-evolutions, fusion evolutions, and synchro evolutions, and discussed how they managed to keep the spirit of their original counterparts alive, as well as how their effects diverge from their inspirations. And in today's video, we're going to be discussing the best XYZ evolution in the game, the difference between them and their first forms, and how they've managed to keep their ideas from their base forms alive. And shining brightly at number 10 is number S39 Utopia the Lightning, the perfected form of number S39 Utopia Prime, who is in turn a shining evolution of number 39 Utopia. In terms of their effects though, the Lightning manages to build on its previous counterparts in a really interesting way. You see, the original Utopia has two effects. One is a huge downside, as it makes it so whenever it's targeted for an attack, when it has no XYZ materials, it just blows itself up. But its second effect is a decently defensive battle-oriented effect that allows you to negate an attack by detaching a material. Meanwhile, Utopia Prime is a lot more offensive. You can summon it either using number 39 Utopia or with 3 level 4 light monsters, and then when your opponent's life points are 3000 or higher than yours, you can detach 3 materials from Prime and pay life points so you only have 10 left in order to destroy all special summon monsters your opponent controls, banish them, and then inflict 300 points of damage to your opponent for every monster you banished. And last but not least, there's Utopia the Lightning, which you can summon using 3 level 5 light monsters, or you can XYZ summon on top of a rank 4 Utopia monster you control, but it can't be used as material for another XYZ summon, making it the end of the line for this particular evolution chain. And when it battles, your opponent can't activate cards or effects until the end of the damage step, which pairs perfectly well with its second effect because if the Lightning has the Utopia monster as an XYZ material during the damage step, you can detach 2 materials from it to make the Lightning's attack 5000 for that damage calculation. Now, at first glance, these effects almost appear to be completely unrelated, with Utopia's attack negation being almost completely opposite to Prime and Lightning's offensive threats. Meanwhile, Prime and Lightning, despite being directly related to one another, don't really share any similarities. But there is one key theme that ties each of these 3 effects together, and it's one that's really important to Yu-Gi-Oh! The desperation play. Whether you call it a final gambit or your last gamble, you're sinking all of your resources in a hopeless situation in order to out an opponent's near unstoppable boss monster, or deal a ton of damage to the life points to give you one last hope to steal the win. This has been a core part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Since Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, and makes for really intense and interesting duels both in the anime and in real life, especially when these huge gambles happen to pay off. And each of these 3 cards manages to portray their idea of a final gambit. In the case of the original Utopia, you can actually use its effect offensively alongside Utopia Double and Double or Nothing, in order to increase Utopia's attack to an absurd amount for one huge final swing to hopefully OTK your opponent. And Utopia Prime can clear away your opponent's entire field of monsters, but forces you down to 10 life points. So if your opponent survives, there's a really big chance of them being able to end the game on their next turn. But between the 3, Lightning's Gambit was the most meta-relevant, as it allowed for any deck that can make a rank 4, like the original Utopia, to instantly rank up into the Lightning without any main deck investment, allowing for a ton of different strategies to have an accessible way of outing some insanely difficult to deal with boss monsters that they'd struggle to deal with otherwise, since 5000 attack can pretty much beat over almost any monster in the game. So if your opponent's Red Eyes Dark Dragoon is giving you trouble, you can just make the Lightning to easily beat over it, and your opponent can't even attempt to negate it as soon as you declare an attack, making it more likely that this final gambit will go through. It's honestly impressive how, despite having such different effects, Utopia, Prime, and Lightning all managed to encapsulate this theme of being one last hope in their own unique way. But out of all of them, Lightning is the one that saw the most competitive play for being so easily accessible and important in outing out tons of different boss monsters, making it not just the last hope of Utopia, but the last hope of a ton of different decks. And flying into number 9 is number 38, Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, which has one of the weirdest evolution lines in Yu-Gi-Oh! Because you might think that due to its name, stats, attribute, type, and rank, that the Hope Harbinger is an evolution of Galaxy Ice Photon Dragon, or another one of its counterparts. But in actuality, Hope Harbinger is an evolved form of number 28, Titanic Moth. It gets even harder to believe when you look at their effects, since they have almost no relation. In the case of Titanic Moth, you can make it using 2 level 7 monsters, and you can attack directly if you control no other monsters. But any battle damage you deal is halved, and after you've dealt battle damage, you can activate Titanic Moth's second effect to burn your opponent for 500 damage for each card they have in their hand. And with Hope Harbinger, you need 2 level 8 monsters to make it, and on a soft once per turn, you can negate the activation of an opponent's spell card or effect, and then attach that negated card to Hope Harbinger as a material. But that's not all. Because with Hope Harbinger, whenever an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can detach a material from it in order to change the attack target to itself. And last but not least, if another face-up XYZ monster you control is destroyed by a battle or card effect, you can target an XYZ monster in the field to make it gain attack equal to the original attack of the destroyed monster. But funnily enough, this lack of connection makes sense in the context of the Zexal manga. You see, in the manga, blank number monsters and their forms and effects are all shaped by the thoughts and desires of the particular owner in a given moment. And initially, the monster that would become Hope Harbinger was owned by Kyoji Yagumo, and was given to hypnotize Haruto Tenjo to use against Kaito. This caused the particular number monster to form into Titanic Moth, since a lot of Haruto's theming related to moths and butterflies due to his memories of catching them with his brother, Kaito. But in the duel against Ira, Kaito was gifted the blank number card that was once Titanic Moth. And because number monsters are shaped by their owners, Titanic Moth went from being an insect to a light dragon, because of Kaito's connection to Galaxy Eye's Photon Dragon, with the only real link they had left between the cards being their name, Titanic. And because their effects are so different, both Titanics are played in completely different contexts in the actual game. Titanic Moth sees minor play in rank 7 strategies like Kashtira, since it allows for easy Zeus line since it can attack directly, and can even cinch out games with its burn effect. But, for the most part, its use in the competitive game has been somewhat limited. Meanwhile, Hope Harbinger has been used in just about any deck that's capable of making rank 8s, since every one of its effects is really strong. Whether you're protecting your Appaloosa from being destroyed by battle, just like how Utopia would be able to, or just negating an opponent's powerful spell card. Overall, it's pretty clear that the only real inspiration Hope Harbinger takes from Titanic Moth is its shared name, but Hope Harbinger still has some cute references to other cards in it, like how its battle phase effect can protect the monsters like Utopia, and how its stat line is exactly the same as Galaxy Eye's Photon Dragon. And in terms of competitive play, there's no doubt about it being one of the strongest XYZ Evolutions in the game, for both its power level and ease of accessibility in rank 8 focused strategies. And pawned to number 8, we have Expurrely Noir, the main boss monster of the recently released Purely archetype, and the upgraded form of Purely, the dark counterpart of Purely. And as a deck, the Purely is filled with a ton of flavor, especially in how you go about summoning Noir. You see, other than being dark fairies, Noir and Purely don't have too much in common, since Purely is designed more as a counterpart to Purely by having a similar on-summon effect to add a card from your deck to your hand, and a similar on-field effect to summon an XYZ monster from your extra deck by using a quick play spell card. In the case of Purely, you can add a Purely card that isn't a quick play spell from your deck to your hand, and special summon out an XYZ monster that mentions the quick play spell you targeted from your extra deck by using Purely as a material, and then attaching that spell. But Noir, being the strategy's main boss monster, allows you to summon out on top of any Purely XYZ you control with 5 or more materials, and lets you detach 2 materials in order to target a card your opponent controls or in the graveyard, and shuffle those cards into the deck. This effect is already absurd, especially because it's not once per turn, and it's a quick effect so long as you have a level 1 Purely monster as material, meaning that if you have enough material stacked on Noir, you can just keep shuffling back your opponent's cards until they have nothing left. And you're going to want Noir to have a lot of materials, because while it has 5 or more materials, it's completely unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. Now, while Noir and Purely's effects aren't really connected, there's a ton of flavor in Noir's summoning condition. You see, the entire Purely archetype is centered around taking care of your pet Purely and raising them to be big and strong by giving them good memories, by attaching those memories to your monsters as XYZ materials, with the way you raise them impacting how they can grow. If you give your Purely monsters a being clean and pretty, they'll turn into Purely Beauty, and be able to attach an opponent's card to it as a material. If you feed it well, then it'll turn into Purely Plump, and will gain a bunch of attack and defense. And if you play with it, it'll turn to Purely Happiness and have the energy to attack more than once per battle phase. Essentially, Purely is the Eevee of Yu-Gi-Oh!, allowing you to pick and choose how it evolves depending on how you raise it. But if you manage to raise your pet really well by giving it a ton of different memories and attaching those memories to it as XYZ materials, you get to summon out Expurrely Noir, the culmination of all your efforts as a pet owner, feeding, cleaning, and playing with them. This gives you access to a really well-trained pet that's so strong because of the care that you gave it that it's unaffected by card effects, can spin back any card on the field, and even gains all the bonus effects and the memories that are attached to it as material. And because Purely can easily stack a ton of materials in Noir with the effects of Plump, or by summoning it with Pure Leap, Purely is currently projected to be one of the strongest decks post-Cyberstorm access. But in order to play the deck well, you need to make sure that you're raising your friend well, which adds some really cute flavor to the incredibly strong archetype. Firing off into number 7 is Gigantic Champion Sargas, the upgraded form of Spriggan's Captain Sargas after combining with Therion King Regulus and Spriggan's Exablower. And as an evolution, its effect is really cool, because not only does it take the effect of the monster it's based on and improve it, it also works really well with its original counterpart. You can either summon Champion Sargas with 2 level 8 monsters, or on top of any Spriggan's XYZ monster. Then, while it has material, you can add a Spriggan's or Therion card from your deck to your hand. Meanwhile, with its second effect, if an XYZ material is removed from a monster, you can target a card in the field and either destroy or return it to the hand. This effect is one inspired by Captain Sargas, which allows you to detach material from a monster you control and target a face-up card in the field and destroy it. The second effect is an amazing way of evolving the original Sargas because these effects work hand in hand. You can detach material with the effect of the original Sargas to pop a card your opponent controls, and then further disrupt them with an even better disruption with the effect of Champion Sargas since you detached material. And this is a really cute way of showcasing how even though Sargas has received an upgrade, he's still the same robot. But Captain Sargas isn't the only way of triggering the second effect, because, just like its original counterpart, Champion Sargas works best when paired with other Spriggans. And this removal effect will trigger whenever material is removed when Expurrely Merrymaker uses its tagout effect, when Tally-Ho detaches material, or just when another Xyz monster detaches material to use its effects. But the reason why Sargas sees competitive play isn't because of Spriggans. It's because it's generically usable in just about any deck capable of making Spriggans Merrymaker, a generic rank 4 that can be made with any 2 level 4 monsters, since you can just summon Sargas on top of it and get access to its search effect. And due to being part of Therion, Sargas can search out Therion King Regulus, an Omni-Negate which you can summon to field for free by targeting a machine or Therion monster in your graveyard and equipping it to it. This gives pretty much any deck that will jump through the hoops of making a rank 4 access to a free Omni-Negate, even if they're not playing a machine type strategy, since they can just put Sargas or Merrymaker into the graveyard to easily summon it out to protect your combo and to add to your end board. But it is especially potent in machine strategies like Super Heavy Samurai that can seed the graveyard with machines really easily. In terms of flavor, Sargas is one of the coolest XYZ evolutions in the game, both in how it improves its original effect and how it keeps the spirit of its first form alive. And even though it mainly sees play for its search effect, it's kind of adorable that, for most strategies, if you want to play Sargas to get access to Regulus, he at least makes sure that his Spriggan brothers are coming along for the ride. And swarming into number 6, we have Evilswarm Exciton Knight, a monster with a ton of different forms and evolutions since it was a key player in the dual terminal lore. Starting off as an evil Steel Swarm Sentinel, he then fused with the violent parts to become the ambivalent Steel Swarm Roach, who, after joining the side of good, eventually evolved into Evilswarm Exciton Knight. Exciton Knight itself even has an upgraded form in Stellar Knight Zephyr Exciton. But out of all of its forms, Evilswarm Exciton Knight is the strongest. It can be made with any 2 level 4 monsters, and it has a quick effect that can be used during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase if your opponent has more total cards in their hand and field than you do, and can destroy all other cards in the field by detaching material. But if you use this effect, your opponent can't take any more damage for the rest of the turn. Now, this effect is strong, really strong, because it's essentially just a field board wipe that's capable of equalizing or turning the tide of an otherwise unwinnable duel, and is why Exciton's release shook up the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame in 2014. Essentially, Exciton Knight was the Zeus of its day, an easy-to-access Xyz monster that was capable of wiping the field. And even in the modern era, Exciton Knight still sees a decent amount of competitive play in decks that are capable of making rank 4s, and is currently an extra deck staple in Runic Naturia, and even saw common play in the extra deck of full power Tearlaments as an extra way to help push through your opponent's board. But for as strong as its effects is, it almost appears to have little to no connection with its previous form since both Sentinel and Roach are based around stopping special 7 level 5 or higher monsters from either activating their effects or hitting the field at all, making them a good fit for the Evilswarm archetype, a deck based around corrupted versions of other monsters that focus on tribute summoning high-level Evilswarm monsters while floodgating your opponent on their high-level boss monsters. But Exciton Knight being so different from the other Evilswarm monsters and even its previous form is actually a really important part of its story. You see, every other Evilswarm monster is a dark monster due to being either demons or infected with the Evilswarm virus, and almost every other Evilswarm monster has a weird attack stat that usually ends in 50, showing how the virus has corrupted them. But Exciton Knight, despite being an Evilswarm in name, is a light monster with pretty normal stats, showing that not only has Exciton Knight escaped the corruption of the Evilswarm virus, likely due to the help of the Constellar monsters, but also fully dedicated himself as a force for good rather than as a tool for evil like all the other Evilswarms. Exciton Knight has rejected the old ideals and philosophies of the Evilswarms, which is why it no longer has any effect to counter level 5 or higher monsters like its previous forms, moving on from his former evil and gaining light as the only good Evilswarm monster. And this plays really well into its current effect, as Exciton is outnumbered by the other Evilswarms in the dual terminal lore, and proves himself by managing to fight back against such overwhelming odds, and staging a comeback for the forces of good. Just like how in a duel, Exciton literally helps you come back from overwhelming odds whenever your opponent has an advantage. Even though Exciton Knight's effect is completely different from its previous counterparts, that's actually a good thing for its favor, because it shows how far Exciton has come from its Sentinel stage, making a metaphorical comeback alongside the literal one contained within its effect. And it's really cool that such a strong card that's genuinely impacted the game in its history has such strong lore implications and flavor. Manifest in the number 5 spot is Kashtira Arise-Heart, the empowered form of Kashtira Arise-Heart, the leader of the Kashtira army and anger-fueled counterpart of Visa Starfrost. The effects of both Rise-Heart and Arise-Heart are really interesting because Rise-Heart's effect directly feeds into Arise-Heart's and helps you summon them out, all while they both carry a theme of the game that relates to the particular lore. With the original Arise-Heart, you can special summon it from your hand if you control any other Kashtira monster, but then you're locked into Xyz monsters for the rest of the turn. Then, while you control Arise-Heart, as long as it's been normal or special summoned this turn, you can banish a Kashtira card from your deck, other than Arise-Heart for cost, in order to banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck face down, while changing its level from 4 to 7. Meanwhile, Arise-Heart is summoned by using 3 level 7 monsters, or can instead be summoned using 1 Kashtira monster during the turn in which Kashtira Arise-Heart has used its effect, and while it's on the field, it has 3 important effects to know. The first is Macrocosmos, which banishes any card that would be sent to the graveyard. The second is a mandatory effect that triggers once per chain whenever a card is banished and allows you to attach a banished card to Arise-Heart. And the third is a soft once per turn effect that allows you to attach 3 materials to target and banish any card your opponent controls face down. Now, in terms of how these effects relate, Arise-Heart isn't a direct upgrade because both Arise-Heart and Arise-Heart fulfill different roles in Kashtira. Arise-Heart is the deck's best extender that gives you access to a whole ton of powerful unbanished effects, while Arise-Heart acts as the deck's main boss monster, capable of winning games due to its powerful floodgate alongside its insane removal, and is so strong as a win condition that most Kashtira decks will usually just end up on an Arise-Heart backed up by a powerful generic staple spell. However, every part of Arise-Heart's effect is really important for preparing for the arrival of Arise-Heart. You see, the idea behind the Kashtira monsters is that they're otherworldly colonizers that prepare their armies to invade other planets to take them over, all while making them inhospitable to the planet's life, which is why Exurrely Noir is capable of blocking zones, and why Arise-Heart forces all cards to be banished. They make the dual field literally uninhabitable for other decks. And Arise-Heart is a really important part of this, because not only does he act as an extender, he prepares for his own transformation by both banishing a card that can be later reattached, and by being able to trigger the effect of Exurrely Noir, since Arise-Heart banishes 3 cards from the top of your opponent's deck. This not only makes the zone on the field unusable, it also means that you fulfill the conditions required for Arise-Heart's arrival, allowing you to easily bring down Arise-Heart on top of your Arise-Heart as if it were a Zodiac monster, in order to bring about your opponent's apocalypse. Arise-Heart and Arise-Heart play really different roles in Kashtira, but it's interesting to see that despite how different they are, they still carry the same themes and ideas between one another, with Arise-Heart's whole purpose as a card being to prepare for its own transformation. And for good reason too, since Kashtira has managed to wreak havoc on the Yu-Gi-Oh metagame thanks to how insane Arise-Heart is as a card, a floodgate, and an invader. And swimming to number 4 is Abyss Dweller, one of the more surprising evolutions on this list that's the evolved form of the dragon dwelling in the deep, having the exact same type, stats, and attribute. Now, Abyss Dweller is mainly known for its lingering floodgate, which allows you to detach material to prevent your opponent from being able to activate any card effects in the graveyard. But it actually has a second effect that, while it has a water monster as a material, it gives all other water monsters, including itself, 500 extra attack. And the dragon dwelling in the deep has a similar attack buff, but instead of increasing the attack of all water monsters on a continuous effect, the dragon instead gains ocean counters during its standby phase. Then, after it's removed from the field, every fish and sea serpent monster you control gains 200 attack for every ocean counter that was on the dragon until the end of the turn. What's funny about this effect is that given enough turns to build up ocean counters, the dragon dwelling in the deep can give a higher attack buff than the Abyss Dweller. But when comparing the two, Abyss Dweller's buff is just straight up an upgrade, since it's easier to get, since you just need to make Dweller with at least a water monster. And the fact Dweller increases the attack of any monster that happens to be water, rather than just 2 specific types, it makes it a lot more versatile and usable in decks like TheDuelLogs, which contain strong water monsters, but not any fish or sea serpents other than Dweller itself. Another big reason though is that Abyss Dweller also doesn't need to go to the graveyard to apply its buff, and actually increases its own stats as well, which makes it more difficult out. But of course, the big factor that divides these cards isn't the strength of their stat modifiers. Its strength is Abyss Dweller's Floodgate that is allowed for it to see near constant play in just about any deck that can make a rank 4, because being able to stop any card effect and being able to activate its effects in the graveyards can shut down a ton of different strategies. From Drytron to Phantom Knights and even TheDuelLogs, these decks need their graveyard, and denying them access to one of the most valuable resources is astonishingly strong, and can leave them depowered with almost no way to actually combo off. However, the interesting thing about the effect is that it still relates to the dragon dwelling in the deep. You see, the implication with the Abyss Dweller is that the abyss it dwells in is the graveyard, and it got there when the dragon dwelling in the deep was sent to the graveyard in order to use its attack buff, which, funnily enough, means that the new form of Abyss Dweller also beats its original counterpart. Abyss Dweller is another card that'll go down in history as one of the most impactful and powerful Xyz monsters ever printed, and was one that was capable of shaping the meta by its presence. And for such a strong card, it's awesome it has roots in a relatively weak and unknown monster that also happens to be a counterpart to a classic vanilla. And quaking into number 3 spot is the true king of all Calamities. otherwise known as VFD, due to the fact that it's a combination of True King Agdamazud, the Vanisher, True King Bahastros, the Fathomer, and True King Lithozajim, the Disaster. Each of these True Kings has 2 effects. The second triggers whenever they're destroyed by a card effect. With Vanisher, you get to add a non-fire worm monster from your graveyard to your hand. Fathomer lets you summon a non-water worm monster from your deck, and Disaster is a reborn for any non-earth worm. But they also have an effect in hand which allows you to destroy 2 monsters in your hand or face up on the field to special summon themselves out, and then cause some kind of disaster, or calamity for your opponent, if you destroy 2 monsters with the same attribute as the True King you're trying to summon. Vanisher lets you banish from the field or graveyard. Fathomer lets you banish 2 spell trap cards from the field or graveyard, and Disaster lets you banish 3 cards from your opponent's extra deck with different names. True King of all Calamities, however, has much less destructive effects, but one that's a lot more impactful in the game, because instead of banishing cards your opponent possesses, VFD lets you detach material from it and declare an attribute to make all monsters in the field become that attribute for the rest of the turn. And then your opponent can't declare attacks or activate the effects of monsters in the possession with the same attribute as the one you declared. It also comes with a bonus effect that pairs really well with the original True Kings, which allows you to destroy monsters your opponent controls when using their effects of the True Kings to summon themselves out. This effect is actually really interesting when paired with his effect to change the attribute of your opponent's monsters. It makes VFD the perfect boss monster for the True King archetype, since you can use it to make your opponent's fire, water, or earth to match the True Kings you have in your hand, so when you summon them you get access to their type of disaster. Which in a way makes VFD live up to his name as the True King of each calamity, especially because its particular floodgate stops monsters of the attribute you declare from being able to do anything to beat it, essentially making it so monsters your opponent controls are powerless to stop the oncoming disasters. However, this particular floodgate was so strong and so game-winning that any deck that was capable of making rank 9s would go out of the way to do so, just so they can go into VFD, because a single activation meant that your opponent was locked out of any on-field effects, and if you declare the right attribute, even monsters in their hand or graveyard would be locked out of their effects as well. And in some cases, decks like Virtual World would even make 2 VFDs in a single turn just so they could easily play around cards like Imperm and Gamma and ensure that the lock sticks. Because in any duel where VFD is allowed to resolve, it's a calamity that no opponent is going to be able to recover from, which is why it was eventually banned in the TCG, the OCG, and even Master Duel itself. Overall, VFD is a really interesting evolution on the original 3 True King monsters, and one that really shows its mastery of Doomsday by making the original True Kings much easier to use. However, while its particular disaster isn't as destructive as Vanisher, Fathomer, or Disaster, it still wreaks havoc onto an unsuspecting opponent, and was so strong that it even allowed for the spirit of the original True Kings to stay alive in any deck that could make a rank 9, letting you unleash an almost unstoppable catastrophe. And linking to number 2 is Lavalval Chain, one of the most busted rank 4s ever printed, and one that's been on the ban list since 2015. Lavalval Chain can be made with any 2 level 4 monsters, and allows you to detach a material to choose 2 effects to activate. Its first effect is in reference to the Lavalval playstyle, a deck that relies on the graveyard in order to make synchro plays, and thus allows you to send any card from your deck to the graveyard. Meanwhile, its second effect is made to work alongside its original counterpart, yugioh Chain, by letting you put any card from your deck on top of your deck. The idea that you're supposed to put a ritual monster or ritual spell on top of your deck so that you can normal summon Chain and guarantee that you're going to plus from its effect. But, as you can imagine, having these 2 generically busted effects on an incredibly generic card made it so that Lavalval Chain saw a lot more play than in either of its home archetypes. For example, this effect was really strong in Shaddoll and Lightsworn decks, so it could be used to send just about any card you wanted from your deck to the graveyard in order to use their powerful graveyard effects. Chain was also a vital tool for Necros, as it allowed them to send Jhin, release their rituals to the graveyard so you can banish it for a ritual summon and lock your opponent under a floodgate, preventing them from special summoning entirely. Essentially, Chain shows the merit of how insanely powerful Foolish Barrow as a card is, especially one that's easily accessible from the extra deck. And if it were legal today, it would see play in just about every single deck that cares about the graveyard in some way to give you access to a ton of busted graveyard effects. But even Chain's second effect was really strong for its time, and in a way, was used in a way similar to how it would be alongside yugioh Chain, just without actually using yugioh Chain. Because if you could find a way to XC summon Lavalval Chain and then draw a card, you could pretty much search for any card in your deck, giving you access to whatever powerful boss monster or combo tool you needed at the time. This was particularly interesting in Infernity, because both of Chain's effects were really useful for them. The Foolish effect was important to send Stygian Street Patrol to the graveyard so you could special summon out Infernities from your hand. But with Chain's second effect, you can control your top deck at any time, which is really important for Infernity Arcfiend. Because if you happen to draw into Arcfiend while you had no cards in hand, you could special summon and then use its effect to add any Arcfiend card from your deck to your hand. And this was amazing in slower formats, because you could combo off to leave you with no cards in hand and guarantee follow-up by making Arcfiend the top card of your deck, and just find a way to draw a card to further your current plays. Overall, Chain actually does a really good job of referencing the original counterpart and keeping the ideas and themes of Lavalval and Yugioh alive in other strategies. The only issue is that it's too good at these themes, and was so generically powerful that it's been banned for around 8 years. But as for absurd as it is, there's one thing stronger than a Foolish Burial. 3 Foolish Burials. And embracing the darkness at number 1 is number 95 Galaxy Dark Eyes Matter Dragon, one of the most busted dragon monsters ever printed, and an evil counterpart to Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon corrupted by the Sin of Pride. The original Galaxy Eyes can be summoned from your hand by attributing 2 monsters with 2,000 or more attack, and has a decently strong battle phase oriented effect. That can be triggered whenever you declare an attack with Galaxy Eyes to target the monster it's battling and banish it alongside Galaxy Eyes. Both monsters then get returned to the field at the end of the battle phase, and then if you happen to have banished an Xyz monster with the effect, Galaxy Eyes gains an extra 500 attack. Essentially, Galaxy Eyes effect is meant to counter Xyz monsters, by banishing them and forcing them to attach all the materials so they can't use their effects. Most of the Galaxy Eyes Xyz counterparts also build on this idea and have insanely powerful battle phase effects that are capable of negating the field or gaining attack in some way. But a really common feature of these upgrades is that these monsters usually have some way of attacking multiple times. And Dark Matter Dragon is no exception, allowing you to detach a material so you can declare 2 attacks per battle phase on monsters. However, this effect is only a bonus. The real reason why Dark Matter saw competitive play was for its first effect, which allows you to send 3 dragon monsters from your deck to the graveyard for cost to force your opponent to banish 3 monsters from their deck. And what's even more absurd is that you can summon Dark Matter using any Galaxy Eyes monster you control as a material, including any of the other Galaxy Eyes upgrades. This is especially insane because Dark Matter Dragon's effect doesn't have a hard once per turn. So as long as you can keep summoning out Galaxy Eyes monsters from your extra deck or graveyard, you can keep using Dark Matter Dragon's effect, potentially foolishing up to 9 dragons in one turn. Dark Matter Dragon acts as a direct contrast to the hope provided by Utopia. In the manga, both Dark Matter Dragon and the Lightning are desperation plays, but while Lightning shined with hope, Dark Matter Dragon was a representation of Kaito's despair, and his desperation to save his younger brother, so much so that he was willing to give to the darkness and discard the light for Haruto. And it's really cute that in Galaxy Eyes decks, this metaphor is quite literal, since the monsters you'll be sending will be Galaxy Eyes Dragon monsters, which, other than Dark Matter, all happen to be light. However, in the TCG, the monsters you sent were never just discarded for a symbolic reason, and instead would be used to further your combo. This was especially insane during Dragon Ruler format, where Dark Matter Dragon could foolish 3 different Dragon Rulers so that you could either be banished for another Dragon Ruler summon, or just brought out directly from the graveyards themselves. And even after the eventual banning and limitations the Dragon Rulers received, Dark Matter Dragon still found a home in just about any Dragon deck that wanted to send cards to the graveyard, especially since it had such a wide selection of options, with the likes of Destrudo, Eclipse Wyvern, and even the White Stones of Ancient and Legend, and decks that are willing to play the Blue Eyes White Dragon for rank 8 materials. But the reason why Dark Matter was eventually deemed too much was because of a number of different factors. The release of Arcbrave Dragon and Amorphage Sloth meant that you could lock your opponent out of the extra deck by sending both from your deck to the graveyard with Dark Matter Dragon, summoning out Sloth with Arcbrave's effect, and then sitting behind your board while your opponent can't combo off. Then, paired with the release of the Guard Dragons, you could summon out Dark Matter twice in one turn to ensure that Arcbrave combo sticks. And last but not least, its generic application in Dragon decks made it so that it was so absurd as an extra deck tool that it was eventually hit on the ban list. While Dark Matter Dragon is known more for its insane combo potential rather than its flavor, it does an amazing job referencing Galaxy Eyes cards, while also having an effect that does a great job of showcasing Kaito's despair. But if you use its effect, despair is likely the last thing you'll feel because you managed to foolish 3 dragons, and it's probably going to be winning you the game, unless your opponent happens to have some last hope they could use to counter you. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other XYZ Evolutions you think should have made this list, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.